We have just moved one step closer to the government killing drug dealers here in the United States because Attorney General Jeff Sessions has released a memo encouraging capital punishment charges for what I would term an oddly expansive list of drug-related offenses. We're not gonna show you the whole memo because it's long, but I do wanna show you two excerpts for two different reasons. Here's the first. The important part is at the bottom. We want the ability to seek capital punishment for certain drug-related crimes. This is going out to the people who will be doing that. Among these drug-related crimes, certain racketeering activities, which theoretically is non-violent. The use of a firearm resulting in death during a drug trafficking crime, that you're talking about murder. Murder in furtherance of a continuing criminal enterprise, there you're talking about murder. And dealing in extremely large quantities of drugs. The articles that I read all said extremely large quantities of drugs, and I was sure that when I read the actual memo, it would be more specific, and it would say fentanyl or something else that's almost necessarily deadly in its use, certainly in large quantities. But no, the actual memo just says large quantities of drugs. There is every reason to believe that that could be used as the pretext to charge people with capital punishment, with the death penalty for dealing marijuana, if it's extremely large quantities, which is a highly technical scientific term. That is a horrifying piece of this memo, and I feel like most of the people in the news who are even discussing this are not focusing enough on that component of it.
Yeah, so I want to give a fact here and then a little bit of amusing conspiratorial, or perhaps not so amusing, conspiratorial speculation. The fact is that it is unconstitutional to give the death penalty to anything that doesn't, to any crime that doesn't lead in death. So that is a long Supreme Court precedent, there's no question about it. So this proposal is unconstitutional from day one, not close, not remotely close, which is what leads to my speculation. So there are actually two other parts of the memo that are good. They talk about reducing the demand and overprescription of opioids, well that's good, and boosting access to treatment, and that's good. So the conspiratorial part is, are they putting something obviously unconstitutional in the proposal so that the whole thing is ruled unconstitutional and they go, oh golly gee, I guess we can't reduce the opioids. All right, pharmaceutical companies, what can we do? I mean, you are a huge donor to us, but what a lucky break for you guys that we happen to put a poison pill, if you will, into this legislation that we knew it would get declared unconstitutional. Oops.
I hope that that's not it. That seems like too clever for them by half.
Well, that's a good point too.
But you could be right. But as of right now, it's in there. And you're right, I have a little bit more on some of the good stuff, but one other part I wanted to focus on, the problem I have with it isn't just that they want to go around murdering drug dealers for increasingly vague reasons, but that they fundamentally don't understand what this problem is about. So they acknowledge overprescription, so they understand that doctors are involved in this and pharmaceutical companies are involved in this, but they also have this section in the memo. Drug traffickers, transnational criminal organizations, and violent street gangs all contribute substantially to this scourge. To combat this deadly epidemic, federal prosecutors, blah, 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 it leads into those charges. Yes, some of the people who become addicted to opioids will then transition over to things like heroin, which because they're illegal, necessarily involve criminal gangs, blah, 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 all that stuff. But the fundamental problem there is still their avenue with which they got to heroin and other sorts of drugs. And that was legally prescribed drugs. There is some component of drug traffickers, in the illegal sense and that sort of thing, but that is not the core of the problem. And the worst hit states, by the way, you're talking about West Virginia and some of the other areas around there, these are not areas with huge urban gangs. This is people who are buying fully legal prescription drugs and becoming addicted to them and then having the obvious consequences. And so I think this is a giant red herring.
So 2/3 of the opioid deaths are from people taking legal opioids, not illegal. Only 1/3 is from illegal drugs. So if you want to execute the top drug dealers in the country, it is literal that you would have to execute the CEOs of the pharmaceutical companies. Now, I'm not in favor of that. I think that's crazy talk. I think it's crazy talk any way you slice it. But the largest drug dealers that lead to the most amount of deaths from opioid addiction are legal chief executive officers of pharmaceutical companies. I did an interview on Rebel headquarters about with someone who's on the medical cannabis board in West Virginia, and he explained there's a town in West Virginia that has about 3,000 people in it, and I forget the exact numbers now, but it was something along the lines of 20 million prescriptions were given to that town over a small period of time. Now, do you think the pharmaceutical companies didn't know the town only had 3,000 people? Oh, golly gee, I thought it was New York City. Is it this little town in West Virginia? No, they knew what they were doing. They knew they were making a profit off of the opioid addiction. They are literally drug dealers.
Dealing, what was the exact term? Extremely large quantities of drugs.
It fits the definition.
Like a lot.
My guess is that the Republicans are not going to execute some of their top donors. And the pharmaceutical companies are the #1 donors to politicians in this country. Yeah. More than oil lobbyists, more than bankers, they're #1. That's why they are immune from all this. And that's why Donald Trump is trying to distract you. He said he would completely wipe out the opioid addiction. He would stop cold under President Trump. It has, of course, gone up recently. And the reality is, he wants you to look at MS-13 and the other street gangs because it's easy to demagogue on those. He wants you to make sure that you're not focusing on the real problem, which is legal opioids. If you want to get the whole Young Turks show every single day, become a member, tytnetwork.com/join. And once you do, you'll be saying,
you know, I'm like a smart person.
Or you might say,
I think it's weird.
Or you might say,
oops.
No, that won't be that one. It won't be that one. It'll be great, trust me. tytnetwork.com/join.